Imagine trying to sleep or, I don't know, study for a math exam, right?
Yeah.
But there's just a towering pillar of fire burning in your backyard.
Just roaring.
Exactly. Roaring like a jet engine. It's shaking the windows of your house, and it's, raining this toxic soot onto your roof.
Coating the rainwater.
Right, the rainwater you actually need to drink. And the heat is so intense that it's literally stunting the crops in your garden. Now, imagine that this pillar of fire hasn't been turned off a single time since 1965.
It's just an incredible image, honestly.
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us because maybe you're researching a paper or you're prepping for a debate or you're just intensely curious about the hidden forces shaping our modern world.
Which is a lot of you, hopefully.
Right. Well, you are in the exact right place. Because today we are unpacking a massive, really sobering research dossier.
We really are.
It's all about Royal Dutch Shell in Nigeria's Niger Delta. We are essentially tracing this global blueprint for power, wealth, and, consequence.
Yeah, the real human consequences.
Exactly. We're looking at the extraction of billions of dollars in crude oil, the devastating toll on the Ogoni people, the tragic 1995 execution of the writer Ken Saro-Wiwa.
A really pivotal moment.
It was. And we're also going to get into the high-stakes litigation that is unfolding in UK courts, right now.
Yeah, this isn't just history. It's actively happening.
So to really understand how all these elements connect, right? Like how a poisoned fishing creek in the 1970s leads directly to a judge's ruling in London half a century later.
Right.
We need a framework, and that's where you come in. Can you break down this concept from the dossier?
Yeah, absolutely. So we really have to look at this idea of the oil company as parallel state.
Okay. The oil company is parallel state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because this extraction model, it wasn't actually invented in West Africa.
Wait, really?
No. It was actually perfected in Latin America.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. When you study the history of the Standard Oil enclave economies.
Right, Standard Oil.
Yeah, in places like Venezuela and Mexico back in the early 20th century, there's a very distinct blueprint that emerges.
Okay, what does that blueprint look like?
Well, basically, a foreign corporate entity arrives in this really resource-rich area. They build their own exclusive infrastructure. I mean, they generate just astronomical wealth.
Right.
And they effectively begin to function as a state within a state.
Huh.
And our dossier tracks how this exact Latin American blueprint was exported, adapted, and then completely implanted into the wetlands of the Niger Delta.
Okay, let's visualize this for a second because I want you, the listener, to really picture what this means on the ground.
That's helpful to see it, yeah.
Right. So put yourself in the shoes of someone just observing this model from the outside. Imagine a high-tech, heavily guarded fortress of immense wealth just constructed right in the middle of a super delicate wetland ecosystem.
Right in the swamp, basically.
Exactly. And inside this fortress, the pumps are running day and night. They're extracting this liquid treasure. But, and here's the key, none of that treasure actually stays in the wetland.
Right, it all leaves.
It gets piped up and out, sent over the fortress walls to foreign shareholders and to a national capital that's hundreds of miles away.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, all the toxic waste, the exhaust, the chemical runoff.
All the bad stuff.
Yeah, that just gets tossed right over the fortress walls onto the neighbors' lawns. That is the enclave model.
That is a perfect analogy. You get the industrial burden,
right?
But you are structurally, legally, totally locked out of the financial reward.
Man.
The wealth is inherently outward-facing, but the consequences, like you said, they are aggressively localized.
Okay.
So to understand the ongoing legal battles in London today, we have to look at the foundational moment when this specific enclave was established.
Where does it start?
The timeline in our dossier basically kicks off between 1956 and 1958.
Okay, mid-century.
Right. This is when oil is first struck in commercial quantities at a place called Olibiri.
Olibiri.
Got it, yeah. So commercial production begins. And Royal Dutch Shell, which is operating locally as the Shell Petroleum Development Company, or SPDC.
Okay, SPDC.
Right. They become the central dominant operator in the entire region. But the mechanics of the corporate state collusion here, it's really unique.
How so?
Well, think about the United States, for instance. You generally have a fundamentally adversarial relationship.
Right, like companies versus regulators.
Exactly. A private oil company leases land, they pay their taxes, and they face a government regulatory body whose literal job is to police the industry.
But wait, looking at the dossier, it outlines a completely different setup in Nigeria.
Very different.
Yeah, because Shell isn't just paying taxes to the Nigerian government. Shell is operating in a joint venture with the state.
That's the crucial difference.
Right. The Nigerian government is like this massive equity holding partner in the business itself. It's a European and Nigerian co-ownership model.
Yes.
So if the state owns the business and, well, the state relies on that business for the vast majority of its strategic revenue,
Which they do.
who is actually regulating the operation? I mean, it sounds like the referee is also the star player on the team.
Oh, absolutely. The structural conflict of interest there is absolute.
It has to be.
Yeah. I mean, you have a newly independent nation. Nigeria gained independence from British rule in 1960.
Okay, right around the time the oil starts flowing.
Exactly. And they are trying to build national infrastructure, fund a military, maintain this sprawling federal government. Their survival as a state becomes inextricably linked to the corporation's success.
Because that's where all the money is.
Yeah, exactly. The government's entire budget relies on maximizing the volume of oil pumped out of the Delta.
Wow.
So imagine if a local environmental regulator wanted to walk into a Shell facility and issue a massive fine for pollution.
Right.
They would essentially be penalizing their own government's primary source of income.
That's wild. It's like suing yourself.
Pretty much. And often, those local regulators didn't even have the independent resources like boats or testing equipment
Yeah.
to monitor this sprawling infrastructure.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they often had to rely on the oil company's own logistics just to get around.
Oh, man. So the Latin American Standard Oil Blueprint, it just functions perfectly in the Delta.
Perfectly?
The wealth flows up to the federal government in Lagos and later Abuja and out to the foreign shareholders in Europe.
Yep.
And meanwhile, the local communities, specifically the Ogoni people who are living directly on top of these oil fields, they just absorb all the externalities.
All of them.
So let's move from the economic theory of this enclave to the physical, like biological reality of the Niger Delta.
Yeah, the situation on the water.
Right, because transposing this massive industrial model from a relatively arid region like in Latin America, Texas, to one of the most densely populated, ecologically complex wetlands on the entire planet, that changes everything.
It changes the whole dynamic.
You aren't just laying pipelines across empty sand. You're weaving thousands of miles of high-pressure steel directly through villages, under family farmlands, and, right through the middle of the mangrove forests.
And the destruction of those mangroves is a really critical point in the dossier.
Yeah, tell me about that. Why are the mangroves so important?
Well, mangroves are not just trees. They are essentially the foundational architecture of the coastal ecosystem there.
Okay.
They have these incredibly complex underwater root systems. They're called pneumatophores.
Pneumatophores.
Yeah. And those roots provide the breeding grounds for the vast majority of the region's fish and crustacean populations.
Oh, wow. So they're like nurseries for the fish.
Exactly. So when crude oil spills into a tidal creek, it coats those aerial roots. And the oil physically asphyxiates the trees. They can't breathe.
That's terrible.
So the mangroves die, the roots rot, the coastal soil erodes, and then the entire local fishery just completely collapses. And from the 1960s all the way through the 1980s, as production was expanding so aggressively, the region experienced these chronic pipeline spills that just decimated these fishing grounds.
And then there's the gas flaring, which we talked about right at the start.
Yeah, the pillars of fire.
Right. Because when you drill for crude oil, this highly pressurized natural gas comes up with it.
It's a byproduct.
Yeah. And in a heavily regulated environment, a company is required to capture that gas, process it, and either, re-inject it into the ground or pipe it out to be sold for power generation.
Because it's valuable.
Right. But capturing it requires building secondary pipelines and processing plants. It requires this massive capital investment.
Which eats into the profit margins of the joint venture.
Exactly. So the cheaper alternative is simply to stick a pipe in the air and ignite it.
Burning it off right at the wellhead.
Just burning money, basically, but it's cheaper than building the infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This practice, it went on continuously for decades.
Decades.
Yeah. And the thermal radiation from these flares is so intense, it literally alters the local microclimate.
Wow, like it changes the weather.
Basically, yeah. And the incomplete combustion releases this horrible cocktail of pollutants. We're talking volatile, organic compounds, sulfur dioxide, heavy metals.
All the stuff you don't want to breathe.
Right. And it all falls back to the earth as toxic soot and acid rain.
Oh, gross.
The soils acidify, which drastically reduces agricultural yields. If you're farming, your crops just fail.
Because the soil is basically poisoned.
Right. And there's empirical data for this. The 2011 assessment by the United Nations Environment Program, or UNP.
Okay, the UNP report.
Yeah, it provides all the hard data for this
Yeah.
devastation. They conducted a really comprehensive, totally independent scientific study of Ogoni land.
And what do they actually do, like on the ground?
They took thousands of soil and water samples across the region.
Right. And the findings in that UNP report are just staggering.
They really are.
Because it wasn't just surface-level pollution. The dossier points out that in some areas, the groundwater was heavily contaminated with benzene.
Which is a known carcinogen.
Right, a cancer-causing agent. And the levels were up to 900 times the World Health Organization guidelines.
And 900 times.
Yeah, and people were drinking this water.
Every day. And the UNAP scientists, they concluded that the contamination was so deeply embedded in the soil profile and the water table
Yeah.
that a comprehensive environmental cleanup would take 25 to 30 years to achieve.
30 years.
Yes. It has a multi-generational timeline just to return the land to a baseline where the water is safe to drink and the soil is safe to farm.
It's like living inside the engine room of a massive luxury cruise ship.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, like you endure the deafening noise, the oppressive heat, the toxic exhaust of the machinery 2047,
Yep.
but you are structurally forbidden from going up to the top deck to look at the ocean or eat at the buffet.
You never see the benefits.
Never. You are just trapped in the underbelly of this economic miracle that actively impoverishes you.
Exactly.
But, okay, a pipeline spilling oil everywhere naturally forces us to ask why the pipes are breaking in the first place.
Right.
And looking at the dossier, this is where the narrative just completely fractures.
It splits wide open.
Yeah. The cause of these spills isn't just some engineering footnote. It is a fierce, highly contested technical debate. And it forms the absolute center of liability in the ongoing lawsuits.
This is crucial. We really have to maintain a strictly impartial view of the historical and legal records here,
Absolutely.
because both sides present diametrically opposed narratives.
Okay, so what is Shell's position?
So Shell's position, which they've maintained historically and in the current UK litigation, is that a vast and significant portion of the oil spillage in the Niger Delta is the direct result of sabotage and oil theft.
Oil theft.
Yes, it's a practice known locally as bunkering.
Bunkering. Okay, how does that work?
Well, bunkering involves these highly organized, often heavily armed syndicates, and they illegally hot tap into the high-pressure pipelines to siphon off crude oil.
Whoa, hot tapping a high-pressure line sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is extremely dangerous. And then they take that stolen crude and they refine it in these illicit bush refineries, or they smuggle it offshore to sell.
Wow. Okay, so Shell is saying it's criminals hacking the pipes.
Right. Shell argues that they're operating a perfectly legal joint venture, but their infrastructure is under constant active vandalism by these criminal elements.
Okay, I can see that. But the communities, the environmental groups, the independent researchers, they look at the exact same spills and draw a completely different conclusion.
Very different.
Yeah, because they argue that while bunkering is absolutely a real and dangerous problem,
Nobody denies it happens.
right, but they say a massive share of the spillage is actually driven by basic operator failure and systemic neglect.
Yeah, aging infrastructure.
Exactly. They point to the age of the pipes. You have carbon steel pipelines that were laid in a highly corrosive, salty, tidal wetland back in the 1960s and 70s.
Decades ago.
Right. And the communities argue that the joint venture just failed to adequately maintain, upgrade, or even bury these pipelines deep enough to protect them from the elements.
So they're just rusting out.
That's the argument. They're saying that an operator extracting billions of dollars from a fragile ecosystem bears the ultimate responsibility to make sure their equipment doesn't rust out and rupture.
And if you're researching this, you have to understand the legal stakes of this forensic debate. They are astronomical.
Right, because it comes down to money.
Exactly. In most legal frameworks, a company's liability shifts dramatically if a spill is proven to be the result of third-party sabotage or terrorism.
Right, assuming they took reasonable security precautions.
Correct. They are generally not strictly liable to pay massive compensation for the criminal acts of others.
Okay, makes sense.
However, if a spill is determined to be the result of corrosion, poor maintenance, or equipment failure,
Then it's on them.
yes, the company is directly liable for all cleanup costs and community damages.
Wow.
So when a pipeline ruptures in a remote mangrove swamp, the forensic investigation into whether the steel gave way from the inside out due to rust or from the outside in due to a hacksaw, That dictates millions of dollars in payouts.
But if both things are undeniably happening, right? Pipelines are rotting from age and syndicates are hacking into them.
Both are true.
How does a judge in a courtroom in London, literally decades later, possibly untangle that?
It's incredibly difficult.
You're looking at a rusted, blown-out piece of metal sitting in a swamp 6 months after the fact, trying to assign a percentage of blame. It feels like an impossible forensic puzzle designed to keep lawyers employed forever.
It really does. It's a massive legal knot.
But you know, when a legal system moves at a glacial pace and the soil is actively dying, the frustration doesn't just stay confined to court filings.
No, it spills out.
Right. In the early 1990s, this systemic frustration boiled over into a massive, organized human response.
And this is where we enter the next major chapter. Enter Ken Saro-Wiwa.
Yes.
To understand the geopolitical earthquake that occurred in the Niger Delta in the 1990s, you really have to understand who Saro-Wiwa was.
Right, because he wasn't a traditional politician.
Not at all. And he wasn't a rebel warlord either. He was a prominent Ogoni intellectual. He was an author. And really interestingly, he was a highly successful television producer.
Oh, wait, really? A TV producer?
Yeah. He actually created this widely popular Nigerian sitcom called Basie and Company.
Wow, I had no idea about the sitcom.
Yeah, so he deeply understood media, narrative, and how the global attention economy worked.
That makes so much sense.
Right, so 1990, under his leadership, the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, or MOSAPI, was founded.
MOSAP, yeah, okay. And Saro-Wiwa didn't just organize random protests, right? He codified the movement's goals.
He wrote them down.
Exactly. In 1990, MOSAP issued the Ogoni Bill of Rights. And reading through this in the dossier, it is a brilliant piece of political articulation.
It really is.
It bypassed the usual complaints about, individual oil spills. It presented a comprehensive structural demand to the Nigerian federal government and to Shell.
What were the main demands?
Well, the Bill of Rights demanded a fair share of the economic revenue generated from the oil beneath their feet.
Reasonable.
Yeah, and comprehensive environmental remediation of their land. And, crucially, political autonomy for the Ogoni people within the Nigerian Federation.
That's a huge demand.
Huge. Saro-Wiwa essentially took a hyper-local environmental grievance and weaponized it using the language of international human rights.
Because he recognized a fundamental asymmetry there.
Right, the power imbalance.
Exactly. The Ogoni people were a minority ethnic group, roughly 500,000 people, and they were facing a well-funded corporate-state joint venture backed by a national military.
Literally David versus Goliath.
Absolutely. They had no physical leverage to win a conventional conflict. But Saro-Wiwa knew that in the post-Cold War era of the early 1990s, the international community was becoming increasingly focused on environmental justice and indigenous rights.
He knew his audience.
He did, by explicitly naming Shell, which is a globally recognized consumer brand.
Everyone knows the logo.
Right. By naming them, he drew international eyes directly to the Delta. He transformed what the Nigerian government viewed as an internal security issue into a massive global public relations crisis for a multinational corporation.
And the scale of mobilization he achieved is just staggering.
It's historic.
Yeah. In 1993, MOSAP organized mass nonviolent protests. We're talking about roughly 300,000 Ogoni people peacefully marching against the ecological destruction of their homeland.
Think about that number, 300,000.
When you consider the total population of Ogoni land at the time, that is a massive, unprecedented percentage of the community taking to the streets.
Almost everyone.
Right. The unrest and the protests became so widespread, so disciplined, and so effective that Shell was actually forced to physically withdraw its personnel and halt its operations in Ogoni land in 1993.
They had to pack up and leave.
The nonviolent movement literally successfully paralyzed the extraction machinery.
But halting the flow of oil in a petrostate is an incredibly dangerous crossing of the Rubicon.
Yeah, because you're messing with the money.
You're messing with the state's survival. And this brings us to the most sobering historical reality in the dossier.
Right. We need to be very measured about how we cover this next part.
Absolutely. Because following the success of the MOSAP protests, the Nigerian government underwent a political upheaval. This led to the military dictatorship of General Sani Abacha, who took power in late 1993.
Okay, General Abacha.
And the Abacha regime viewed the situation in Ogoniland not as an environmental grievance to be negotiated, but as a direct existential threat to the state's strategic revenue. A state entirely dependent on oil simply cannot allow a local nonviolent movement to successfully demonstrate how to shut down the oil fields.
Because if the state's budget is the oil, and you stop the oil, the state treats you as an enemy combatant.
Exactly.
The military dictatorship responded with a brutal, systematic crackdown across Ogoni land in 1994 and 1995.
It was horrific.
The historical record, which has been compiled by human rights organizations globally, it documents the deployment of an internal security task force.
Right.
And this force conducted raids on Ogoni villages, engaging in widespread terror, killings, and mass displacement.
And we should note the dossier says that while exact figures for the death toll vary depending on the source.
Right, the numbers are hard to pin down exactly.
Right, with some estimates reaching into the thousands dead or displaced. The sheer scale of the state-sponsored violence was catastrophic.
It was. And the climax of this crackdown was the arrest of Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other prominent Ogoni leaders,
who became known globally as the Ogoni Nine.
The Ogoni Nine. They were detained by the military regime and brought before a specially convened military tribunal.
Not a regular court.
No.
Oh.
And they were charged with incitement to murder. This was stemming from the deaths of 4 conservative Ogoni chiefs who had been killed by a mob during a riot.
But the international community's view of those charges was completely unanimous.
Oh, absolutely. Human rights observers, international legal experts, foreign governments, they all widely and loudly condemned the charges as entirely fabricated.
A sham trial.
Right. The tribunal was viewed not as a legitimate court of law, but as judicial theater. It was designed by the dictatorship to just eliminate its most effective political opponent.
And despite massive international pressure,
pleas for clemency from world leaders, explicit threats of economic sanctions, the Abacha regime did not waver. On November 10, 1995, Ken Saro-Wiwa and the 8 other Ogoni leaders were executed by hanging.
It's just a really heavy historical fact to sit with, and the geopolitical fallout from that was immediate and severe.
What happened right after?
Well, Nigeria was almost instantly suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations.
Okay, so immediate diplomatic isolation.
Exactly. Ambassadors were recalled, and international condemnation just rained down on the military government. The executions cemented in the starkest possible terms the darkest consequences of this corporate state alliance.
I have to look at this from a purely strategic standpoint for a second.
Okay.
What was the dictatorship thinking? Executing a globally recognized intellectual, a man who had already drawn the eyes of the world to the Delta. I mean, that guarantees that you turn him into an international martyr.
It absolutely does.
It guarantees intense, furious scrutiny of the enclave. Shell's operations are now literally synonymous with a state execution. Why wouldn't the regime just, I don't know, leave him in prison?
Because you have to understand the ruthless, short-term calculus of a petrostate.
Okay, explain that.
The military dictatorship was utterly dependent on uninterrupted oil revenue to pay its generals, to suppress internal dissent, and just to maintain its grip on power.
So they needed the cash flow immediately.
Right. The Abacha regime calculated that the long-term threat of Mossad.
Meaning a successful, replicable, nonviolent movement?
Exactly. A movement that proved it could shut down oil fields.
Yeah.
That was vastly more dangerous to their immediate survival than the short-term global outrage over an execution.
Wow.
They were willing to absorb international condemnation, diplomatic isolation, even economic sanctions, just to permanently dismantle the leadership of the movement.
To protect the integrity of the extraction enclave.
Exactly. They chose the oil over their global reputation.
They did. And that brings us to what is easily the most hotly contested, complex question in the entire dossier.
Yes. The liability question.
Right. We know the Nigerian military dictatorship carried out the crackdown and the execution.
That's a matter of record.
But the question that has driven decades of relentless litigation is this. Where was Shell while its joint venture partner was using lethal military force to protect the oil fields?
And we have to tread carefully here and look strictly at the allegations versus the defenses.
Agreed. So let's lay out the accusations first. They are severe.
Very severe. Protesters, human rights groups, and later the plaintiffs in various lawsuits, they alleged that Shell was complicit in the human rights abuses committed by the Nigerian military.
In what way? Like, practically speaking?
Well, the allegations state that Shell, operating through its subsidiary, provided critical logistical support to the state security forces.
Logistical support? Like what?
Plaintiffs allege the company allowed the military to use its transportation infrastructure, including helicopters and boats, to access remote villages.
Okay.
They also allege that Shell provided financial payments and field allowances to the military personnel operating in the Delta.
Wow.
and that the company effectively encouraged the crackdown in order to safely resume its paused extraction operations.
Okay, but wait. Shell isn't the one pulling the trigger here.
No, they are not.
They are a private, multinational corporation operating under the jurisdiction of a sovereign, highly volatile military dictatorship. I have to imagine Shell's lawyers look at these lawsuits and say, we didn't control General Abacha's troops. We are just as much a hostage to this dictatorship as anyone else.
That is exactly what they argue.
Right, because their staff and their infrastructure were also under severe threat from the unrest. Shell's defense has to be that they were bystanders to state violence, not architects of it.
And Shell has consistently, vehemently, and repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, complicity, or liability regarding the military's actions in Ogoni land.
Right.
Their defense rests exactly on the premise you just outlined. They argue they had absolutely no control over how the sovereign Nigerian military chose to deploy its forces or conduct its internal security operations or, run its military tribunals.
So it's basically, we're just a company, they're the government.
Right. And this parses a very fine but absolutely central legal and moral distinction that the courts have grappled with for decades.
What's the distinction?
There is a profound legal difference between benefiting from state violence.
Like, for instance, if the military unilaterally clears out protesters, and you are then able to resume pumping oil.
Exactly. Benefiting from it versus actively directing or facilitating that violence, Shell maintains they did not direct, facilitate, or orchestrate the military's crackdown.
But the plaintiffs push back on that distinction hard.
They do.
Because when you're a joint venture partner, the entity you literally share the business, the profits, and the infrastructure with is a military dictatorship, and they are using lethal force to protect the very oil wells you operate. Is it even possible to remain a neutral bystander?
And that is the million-dollar question.
Right. Can a corporation operate inside a highly militarized, violent enclave without absorbing its nature?
And that specific question, can a corporation separate itself legally from the human rights abuses of its state partner? That drove a landmark legal case in the United States.
Okay, let's talk about that case.
So in 2009, a case called Wiwa v. Royal Dutch Shell was scheduled to go to trial in federal court.
And this was brought by the family of Ken Saro-Wiwa.
Yes, his family and other plaintiffs. And what makes this really fascinating for legal researchers is the mechanism they used, the Alien Tort Statute.
The Alien Tort Statute, I saw this in the dossier. This is an incredibly old law.
Extremely old.
It was originally passed by the first U.S. Congress in 1789.
George Washington's era.
Exactly. And it was initially designed to deal with things like pirates on the high seas or attacks on ambassadors, giving foreign nationals the right to seek remedies in U.S. courts for violations of international law.
Right. And for nearly 200 years, it just sat mostly dormant.
Gathering dust.
Pretty much.
Well.
But in the late 20th century, human rights lawyers brilliantly resurrected it.
How so?
They started applying it first to foreign dictators who were hiding out in the U.S., and eventually they attempted to apply it to multinational corporations.
Ah, clever.
The Wiwa case was a massive test of whether a corporation could be held liable in a U.S. court for complicity in human rights abuses abroad.
So what happened? Did it go to trial?
Well, after years of grueling pretrial discovery and massive legal maneuvering, right before opening statements were set to begin in New York, the case settled.
Settled right at the finish line.
Yes. Shell agreed to pay $15.5 million.
Wow. But the dossier is very clear on the legal caveats of that settlement.
Extremely clear.
Mm-hmm.
Crucially, Shell explicitly admitted no liability.
No liability at all.
None. They stated the payment was a humanitarian gesture.
Okay.
It was meant to assist the Ogoni people with educational and development trusts and to help resolve the long-standing conflict.
Yeah.
It was legally structured to completely avoid any admission of complicity in the executions or the military crackdown.
A $15.5 million humanitarian gesture.
Yes.
I mean, in the context of an oil giant that extracts billions of dollars in revenue from the region, that is a very specific, calculated kind of math to make a high-profile, precedent-setting trial just go away.
It was a pragmatic legal move, for sure.
And for a long time, legal observers thought that 2009 settlement might be the end of the road for the Delta litigation. Just a historical footnote.
But it wasn't.
No, the timeline in our dossier doesn't stop. It actually accelerates into a completely new arena. The battle moves from American courts fighting over human rights to European courts fighting over environmental destruction.
Right. We start seeing this cascade of recent legal battles that are fundamentally reshaping global corporate accountability.
So the focus shifts back to the sheer volume of oil spilled into the ecosystem.
Exactly. And in 2015, we see a massive development regarding the Bodo community.
Bodo, what happened there?
So in 2008 and 2009, two catastrophic spills occurred from a Shell pipeline in Bodo. It poured hundreds of thousands of barrels of crude into the creeks over several months.
Hundreds of thousands of barrels.
Yeah. And after years of litigation in the UK, the Shell subsidiary agreed to an out-of-court settlement of 55 million British pounds.
55 million pounds.
To compensate the community and the individual fishermen.
And 55 million pounds is a significantly larger number than $15 million. It reflects immense legal pressure.
It really does.
But the communities were still hitting a brick wall when it came to holding the actual parent company responsible.
Right, because of the corporate veil.
Exactly. For decades, the ultimate legal shield for multinational corporations was this corporate veil.
Can you explain how that works in this context?
Sure. The parent company, right, sitting in a glass tower in London or The Hague, would say, we are a completely separate legal entity from SPDC, the subsidiary operating in Nigeria.
So they wash their hands of it.
Right. If you have a problem with a pipeline in the Delta, you have to sue the local Nigerian company in a Nigerian court.
And how did the plaintiffs respond to that?
The plaintiffs countered that the Nigerian judicial system was too slow, under-resourced, or politically intertwined with the joint venture to ever offer a fair fight.
Which brings us back to that conflict of interest we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
The corporate veil is really the foundational bedrock of modern global capitalism. It limits the liability of the parent company.
But in 2021, a seismic legal shift occurred.
Oh, this was huge. The UK Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling in a case called Ogoni v. Shell.
Ogoni v. Shell, what did they decide?
The court essentially asked a very practical question. How much control does the parent company in London actually exert over the subsidiary in Nigeria?
Because if they're calling the shots.
Right. The plaintiffs argued that Shell's headquarters didn't just sit back and collect dividends. They argued that London issued mandatory safety guidelines, directed technical operations, and exerted intense management control over the Nigerian infrastructure.
So the plaintiffs argued that because London was pulling the strings, London owed a duty of care directly to the communities living next to the pipelines in Nigeria.
Precisely. And the UK Supreme Court agreed that there was an arguable case to be heard.
They let it go forward.
They pierced the corporate veil. They ruled that the Nigerian communities could sue the UK-based parent company right there in English courts.
That is massive.
It is. And almost simultaneously, a Dutch appeals court found Shell Nigeria legally liable for specific spills, ordering them to pay compensation and, crucially, to install leak detection equipment on their pipelines.
Which brings our deep dive right up to the present day and looking into the future timeline of the dossier, 2025 to 2027.
Right, what's coming next?
This isn't just history. The machinery of these lawsuits is actively grinding forward right now.
Currently, claimant communities, specifically the Bill and Ogel communities, who are represented by the UK law firm Lee Day.
Okay, Lee Day.
Yeah, they are advancing a massive pollution and liability case in the UK High Court right now. We are seeing pivotal rulings expected in 2025 regarding complex jurisdictional issues.
Like how Nigerian law applies within a British courtroom.
Exactly. And all of this is setting the stage for what is slated to be a comprehensive blockbuster trial in 2027.
For anyone trying to make sense of how global power works, this is why it matters.
It's a perfect case study.
It is. The blueprint set up in the 1950s, the physical infrastructure laid in the swamps, and the brutal crackdowns of the 1990s. They are not dead history.
No.
They are living, breathing legal arguments actively being fought over by armies of lawyers in London right now.
The past is very much present.
The pollution generated half a century ago is still destroying the soil today, and the global legal system is only just now figuring out the forensic mechanisms to assign responsibility for it.
It's like a really grueling 30-year relay race for accountability.
That's exactly what it is. The baton was forged by Ken Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni People in the 1990s when they forced the world to finally look at the enclave.
Then the baton was passed to human rights lawyers in U.S. courts in the 2000s using the Alien Tort Statute.
Right. And today, that baton is being carried into the UK High Court by a new generation of community leaders and environmental litigators.
It really highlights the incredible multi-generational endurance required to challenge the architecture of a parallel state.
It does. Let's synthesize the journey we've been on.
Sounds good.
We traced the blueprint of the Latin American oil enclave as it was exported and dropped directly into the fragile, complex wetlands of West Africa.
We dug into the mechanics of the environmental devastation, right? How crude oil literally asphyxiates mangrove forests, how gas flares acidify the soil, and the daily reality of communities trapped inside an extraction zone that offers them absolutely no wealth.
We examined the strategic brilliance of the Ogoni people, led by Ken Saro-Wiwa, who weaponized global media to organize a massive nonviolent resistance against an immensely powerful corporate state alliance.
We also reviewed the brutal, calculated execution of Saro-Wiwa and the Ogoni Nine by a military dictatorship desperate to protect its petro revenue.
And we tracked the incredibly complex legal evolution from 18th century piracy laws to modern corporate veils as communities fight to untangle corporate liability from state violence.
And the reason this dossier is so vital is that this isn't just a localized story about Nigeria or just a story about Shell.
No, it's bigger than that.
It is the ultimate case study in how the global economy extracts resources. It shows us exactly who pays the hidden, visceral costs of the energy that powers our cities, our cars, and our lives.
And it shows us how the law tries, often decades late, and with immense friction, to balance the scales.
Very slowly.
Which leaves us with a final thought to take away. As we watch these UK court cases unfold through 2027, think about the immediate future.
The energy transition.
Right. The world is transitioning away from crude oil. We are moving rapidly toward green energy, which requires a massive, unprecedented global rush to extract lithium, cobalt, copper, and rare earth minerals.
The resource changes, but the blueprint of extraction rarely does without a fight.
Exactly. So the question is, will the enclave model simply mutate?
That's a scary thought.
Will that Latin American blueprint just attach itself to these new minerals and new countries? Will we see heavily guarded fortresses of wealth built around cobalt mines where the minerals go up and out and the toxic runoff goes over the walls?
It's very possible.
And if the standard blueprint of corporate-state collusion just changes its branding to green energy, who will be the Ken Saro-Wiwa of the next generation to sound the alarm?
Who's going to step up?
At the beginning of this deep dive, we talked about building a fortress in a wetland. The machinery in the engine room is still humming.
Still going.
The question now, in the courts of London and in the global energy transition ahead, is whether we can finally force the architects of that fortress to clean up the swamp they left behind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the blueprints of the world around you.